How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, we're going to take a close look at the Northern Atlantic, where we do have several disturbances we're keeping a close eye on. We, of course, have the remnants of Tropical Storm Lee, which has made landfall right around the Nova Scotia area at around 70 miles per hour, and is quickly weakening, of course, since it's now moving over land. It's, of course, disconnected from the instability associated with the warmer waters further southward, and even if this were to move back over the Atlantic Ocean, it's gonna deal with sea surface temperatures that are much colder than what it was experiencing just south, I'll say, of Bermuda. So we're gonna see rapid weakening, although there is quite a bit of baroclinic instability surrounding this storm system. It's just dealing with too much land interaction. The wind shear is also very strong this far up northward, and it's moving over very cool waters, but still watch out for heavier bouts of rainfall right around the New Brunswick area of Canada, the Nova Scotia area, as well as gustier winds right around Maine and other portions of New England, but not much more to worry about when it comes to post-tropical cyclone Lee as it continues ahead further northeastward. But taking a look further southward, we have another tropical disturbance, which likely will become Tropical Storm Nigel in the near future, where this is expected to become a hurricane. So we're going to keep an eye on that over the next several days. We also have Tropical Storm Margaret, but isn't expected to do much of anything in the near future and just dissipate, as it seems like it's dealing with too much wind shear and not enough convective activity surrounding this storm system and a decent amount of dry air. So we're likely going to see this dissipate and not really be a threat to land in the foreseeable future. And a little bit further southward, we are also keeping an eye on the next few tropical waves coming off the West African coast, because there is a possibility we could see a tropical storm develop somewhere in the main development region. And in fact, the European model has been a little bit more aggressive in developing one of these tropical waves into a tropical storm. And another thing we're going to need to pay close attention to is this trough right here. And you're probably asking, what does this mid-latitude low have to do with the hurricane season? Well, it's not necessarily the low itself that we're concerned about when it comes to tropical development. It's what's behind this low pressure system, where this low pressure system could develop an area of thundershower activity just off the coast of Florida that could potentially develop into our next tropical storm that could be an imminent threat to the United States East Coast, where the European and the GFS model been a little bit aggressive in developing a tropical cyclone just off the southeast. So we're going to, of course, pay close attention to this in this video. So here's a quick look at the global tropics hazards outlook, and we do see that at least for the week ending September 26th, there is a large area of the main development region that has a good possibility of tropical cyclone development. And in fact, if we were to go even more into the long-term future for the week ending October 3rd, the area only expands, where now the areas where you could receive tropical cyclone development now includes the Caribbean, the Western Caribbean, as well as portions of the Gulf of Mexico. So definitely along the United States coast, potentially Central America and the Caribbean, you definitely need to at least be aware of the hurricane season over the next 2 weeks, because it's far from over and we're still considered in the peak of the hurricane season. So now let's take a look at the latest run of the European model when it comes to the forecast for the relative humidity for these next few tropical disturbances. Of course, we have post-tropical cyclone Lee just made landfall. Expect this to move northeastward. Expect gustier winds, like I said, right around Atlantic Canada, but not much more than that. It's gonna enter very cool it's gonna move over sea surface temperatures that are very cold, too cold to support for tropical cyclone development or much intensification despite the baroclinic instability. So don't expect much more beyond this point, beyond the point at which it impacts Canada. So not much to worry about there. But moving our focus a little bit further southward, here's what will likely become Tropical Storm Nigel and likely Hurricane Nigel in the more long-term future. We do see that there's quite a bit of moisture surrounding it, and it's in its own little isolated island, which isn't a good sign when it comes to tropical disturbances, because when we see an area of convective activity very consolidated, very close, away from other areas of convective activity, that typically promotes more tropical that promotes more intensification, because the smaller a storm system is, the more likely it's able to converge at energy over a smaller area, which means that a more efficient heat engine builds, which encourages more lift, as well as lower pressure along the surface for the wind speed to increase. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We aren't seeing other multiple areas of convective activity trying to steal away any energy away from this storm system. It's very small, it's very isolated from everything else, which means that it has a pretty open area to where it could intensify into a hurricane, where we see the millibar pressure drop down to as low as the 970s and even the 960s once this heads just north of, let's say, the latitude of Boston. But the good news is that it's expected to move out to sea. There's pretty high certainty with this forecast, and it stakes in part due to this trough moving through that I will talk to you guys about in a second, which could in fact enhance the possibility of our next tropical cyclone developing near the U.S. But at least for in this instance, this trough should help move away what will likely become Hurricane Nigel, as it's going to create a weakness in ridging, shift the wind direction along the surface from easterly direction to more of a southwesterly direction, which will of course push this storm to the northeast. So not much to worry about there, but just watch out for the possibility of rip currents along Atlantic Canada, New England, and even further southward into the mid-Atlantic, because even though this storm will be hundreds of miles away, the rip current risk and the rough surf will still be there. So make sure to be aware of that along the coast, even as we approach the mid to late portion of September. But moving on to our next potential tropical disturbance, which could develop potentially close to home. So here's the trough that I was just talking to you guys about when I was talking about the water vapor imagery just now, that's currently moving through the Midwest. It's expecting to move through. There's going to be plenty of cool, stable air right behind it. So we should see an enhanced amount of convection just ahead of this trough. And this trough should be quite strong by the time it approaches the East Coast, to where we could potentially see a nor'easter type scenario. Of course, I'm not saying that there's going to be a powerful nor'easter, but it could at least be powerful enough to where potentially the coast could experience gustier winds as well as heavier rainfall. So definitely watch out for that, especially right up along New England, because I'm sure a lot of the beaches have already been beat up pretty bad by Hurricane Lee passing just to the east of you guys. So this could potentially only compound the beach erosion right up along the coast. Again, I don't expect anything major from this nor'easter, but the pressure should drop to 994, which is a little bit rare to see a nor'easter at least this early during the fall, but we could certainly see it with enough instability behind it, enough cool, stable air just behind a very warm core convective area. So we should see just enough lift for a nor'easter to form, but it's not this nor'easter that I'm worrying about, because this will likely be only considered a mid-latitude cyclone, not necessarily a tropical entity. It's going to be well too far to the north. But look behind it, it does leave it a trail of moisture right over Florida. And if we were to continue to move forward with the forecast, we in fact do see the European model wanting to develop a tropical storm, and brings it towards the coast, towards the southeast. And it isn't very powerful. It's primarily a weak tropical storm, but comparing it to what the GFS model is stating, the GFS model expects a much stronger storm, where we see the millibar pressure drop down to 997 millibars. However, I wouldn't be surprised if this could be considered a subtropical storm, because it does have a very mid-latitude cyclone look. We have plenty of dry air that's entraining it, especially on the eastern side, which really resembles what you'd see in a typical trough moving through the mid-latitudes. And so this could potentially attain some subtropical characteristics, but whether it is subtropical or not, this would bring tropical storm-like impacts for heavy rain, gusty winds, and potentially coastal flooding in localized areas if this were to become strong enough. The good news is that I don't expect this to really drop in pressure so high to a point where this could rapidly intensify, because if we were to take a look at the upper level wind forecasts, if this storm were to develop, it could be in a small area where it could avoid the wind shear, but it's going to be surrounded by stronger wind shear on the eastern half of this storm. And while it would move the same direction as a stronger wind shear, the strong wind shear will at least put a cap in terms of how strong or how rapidly it could intensify, because any sort of stronger than usual wind shear would deter a storm from at least having a possibility of rapidly intensifying, because for a storm to rapidly intensify, you need all the convergence, all the air molecules focusing in on one area between all layers of the atmosphere. If we were to see in an anomalous area of stronger wind shear in the upper levels like we see right here, then that would push just enough of the air molecules away from the center of circulation to the point where convergence won't be maximized, which means that lift and the pressure lowering along the surface won't be maximized enough for this storm system to rapidly intensify. So I don't expect a rapidly intensifying storm, and if this were to hit land early, of course that would limit the possibility it could develop into a hurricane, but this would still be pretty impactful, more specifically when it comes to heavy rainfall right up along the southeast. So this is definitely something to keep in mind right up along the southeast coast over the next several days. Taking a look at the steering flow of this storm system, you're going to see the main steering flow will be this ridge that's going to be just to the east of it. Right after this nor'easter moves through, this ridge should build in just to the east of it and steer it northward, and depending on how strong this ridge is, how far east or west it is, I'll determine if it could move a little bit further northward and strengthen a little bit more and approach northeast as a stronger storm, or have a short-lived lifespan and just fizzle out over land very quickly, since it won't have a lot of time over water to necessarily develop into a tropical storm. And there's also easily the possibility this ridge could be just too strong and pushes the convective activity too much inland to the point where a tropical storm is unlikely to develop. Those are all possibilities. It's still too early to iron out which one will be the correct one, but I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days regarding this storm system. It's likely will, if this were to develop, it likely would develop subtropical characteristics, so I don't expect this to be anything, I'll say, rapidly intensifying, potentially into a very strong hurricane, but you never know this early, so we're just going to have to wait and see how things play out. But it's interesting that at the GFS and the European model, at the very least, both agree a low pressure system should develop just off the southeast coast, and both agree that it'll reach at least tropical storm status. So the southeast, you at least need to be aware of this as we approach next week. This should happen right around the weekend, beginning on September 23rd. So make sure to keep tabs on that as we approach next week. Now, shifting our focus to the main development region, if we were to continue to move forward with what the European model is stating, the European model expects a pretty powerful tropical wave to come off the West African coast right around the Wednesday timeframe, September 20th, where we do see a decent amount of moisture surrounding it, and it maintains its strength for quite a while, but does eventually develop a core as it's able to at least have just enough convective activity surrounding the center circulation for the pressure to lower, and it's also isolated enough to the point where other areas of convective activity won't compete with the same limited amount of air molecules to converge over one area. So all the air molecules surrounding it and all the energy, pretty much all the vorticity, will focus on this area rather than other areas of convective activity, which could maximize tropical cyclone intensification. And we do see that with the European model, where the pressure does drop to tropical storm status in the very long-term future. I'm talking about next week, entering the September 24th to 26th time frame. So this is at least something to keep in mind. Of course, it looks like it's headed straight towards the Caribbean islands. It's still too early to say if this will develop, especially since the GFS model isn't as confident. One of the big things that could be an inhibiting factor is the amount of dry air, because it will be variable over the next few days over the main development region. There will be a decent amount of dry air just to the north of it, and there could be an upper level low located right around this area that could force some of the drier air a little bit further southward into the western half of this storm system. And for the GFS model scenario, at the same time period, we pretty much see nothing develop out of these next few tropical waves. One of the big reasons is that the dry air just because is just a little bit too much. We also see the aerial moisture is a little bit too elongated for the vorticity to focus in on one area, and we do see just a lot of dry air. This ridge is quite the amount of ridging will be quite strong, and just the orientations of these next few troughs moving through and their interactions with the ridge will promote a little bit more dry air to move further southward, as we do see a pretty strong southerly flow that's bringing the dry air southward. So there's still uncertainty regarding the possibility of a tropical storm over the Caribbean, but I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days. However, if we were to take a look at a GFS ensemble members, we do see that there are some ensemble members wanting to develop a tropical storm right around the main development region between now and 240 hours from now. So the GFS model is at least acknowledging that possibility. So the Caribbean, you definitely need to keep tabs on this. Make sure to watch my videos for more updates, or just any other any other method you get your forecasts, because you never know with the hurricane season. With the GFS model at least acknowledging the possibility of tropical cyclone development, as well as the European model, you at least need to keep this in mind over the next as we approach next week. And taking a look just off the southeast coast, we do see that the GFS model wants to develop a low pressure system just off the coast. It's not very powerful, but it's at least still something to be aware of, that possibility of a tropical storm by next week, with both of the computer models agreeing that we should see a tropical storm. We're going to need to see if that keeps up, but I'll definitely make sure to keep you guys up to date regarding the latest, any changes with the forecast. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more weather related content.